"You worthless whore destroyed this family." Eduardo's voice exploded across the boardroom at 2:30 p.m. as I walked through the door in my army dress uniform. The Medal of Honor gleamed on my chest like a target. The conference room at Gonzalez restaurant's headquarters reeked of desperation and stale coffee. My father sat at the head of the mahogany table, his weathered hands gripping a stack of bankruptcy papers like they might burst into flames. My brothers Carlos and Diego flanked him, their expensive suits a stark contrast to my military bearing. I remained at attention, spine straight, eyes forward. A lifetime of military discipline had taught me that silence could be more powerful than any retaliation. Carlos leaned forward, his manicured fingers drumming against the table. "She chose killing over cooking," he said, voice dripping with disgust. "While we built this empire, she ran off to play soldier and destroyed our family honor." 15 restaurants, Diego added, sliding a folder across the table. 5 million in debt, all because our sister abandoned her responsibilities to go feed death instead of life. I walked slowly to the empty chair across from them and sat down. Without breaking eye contact with Eduardo, I unpinned the Medal of Honor from my uniform and placed it deliberately on the polished wood surface. The metallic clink seemed to echo forever in the suffocating silence. Eduardo stared at the medal like it was a venomous snake. "Blood money from the war machine," he spat. "You think this makes up for what you've done to us?" The irony wasn't lost on me. For the past 3 years, I'd coordinated food distribution for over 2 million Ukrainian refugees. The Department of Defense had awarded me their highest civilian honor for humanitarian logistics. International media called me the Angel of Logistics. Yet here in San Antonio, in the boardroom of the family business that had been hemorrhaging money since I left for West Point, I was still the daughter who destroyed everything by refusing to stay in the kitchen. "The timing is suspicious," Carlos continued, his corporate lawyer tone making every word sound like an accusation. "Our profits started declining the year you got your commission. Our reputation in the community tanked when people found out Eduardo Gonzalez's daughter was more interested in feeding soldiers than feeding families." I finally spoke, my voice steady and measured. "I've spent the last decade organizing supply chains that feed millions of people daily. I coordinated the largest humanitarian food operation in Eastern Europe. If your restaurants are failing, it's not because I left. It's because you never learned how to run them properly." Eduardo's fist slammed against the table, making the bankruptcy papers scatter. "You feed soldiers to kill, we feed families to live. There's blood on every grain of rice you've ever distributed, and now you want to lecture us about feeding people." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a grenade. I'd heard variations of this curse from him for years, but today it carried the weight of genuine financial ruin. The man who had once locked me in the kitchen for hours was now blaming me for his own failures. I stood up, leaving the medal on the table. "I didn't come here to be blamed for your poor management decisions. You called this meeting. What do you want?" The silence stretched between us like a tripwire. Eduardo's eyes darted to the medal, then back to my face. For just a moment, I saw something flicker across his features. Not remorse, not pride, but something harder to define. Recognition, maybe, or fear. "We need solutions," Diego said quietly, breaking the tension. "The suppliers are threatening to cut us off. The bank wants their money. We have 3 weeks before they start seizing assets. And you think I can fix 15 restaurants from my base in Virginia? You're good at organizing things," Carlos admitted reluctantly. "Always have been, even as a kid. Maybe you could look at our supply chain, figure out where we're bleeding money." I almost laughed. After 16 years of treating me like a traitor for choosing military service over family servitude, they wanted my expertise but not my presence. They needed the skills I'd developed by leaving them behind, but they'd never admit that my departure had been the right choice. Eduardo leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of wounded pride and desperate calculation. "Fix this mess," he said finally. "But don't think this changes anything between us. You made your choice when you chose war over familia." As I walked toward the door, I could feel their eyes on my back. The metal remained on the table, catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Behind me, I heard Eduardo mutter something to Carlos in rapid Spanish, but I didn't turn around. The elevator ride down felt like descending into a memory I'd spent years trying to escape. But as the doors opened onto the main floor of the restaurant, where I'd once been forced to memorize recipes instead of business plans, I realized this wasn't about salvation. This was about something that began 25 years ago when an 8-year-old girl reached for a cookbook and discovered that some secrets are worth burning for. 25 years earlier, at 6 a.m. on a humid San Antonio morning, I crept barefoot across the cold kitchen tiles toward Abuela Rosa's wooden recipe box. The house slept around me, but I'd been awake for hours, driven by an 8-year-old's curiosity about the secrets that made our family restaurant empire possible. The recipe box sat on the highest shelf, ancient and weathered like Abuela's hands. I dragged a chair across the floor, wincing at every creak, and climbed up to reach the treasure I'd been forbidden to touch. Girls cook, they don't steal business secrets. Eduardo had warned me just last week when he caught me listening to his meeting with suppliers. But Abuela Rosa had whispered something different when she taught me to make her famous mole sauce. "Recipes are power, Mija," she'd said, her voice barely audible over the sizzling onions. "Whoever controls the recipes controls the money." I lifted the wooden lid and gasped. Inside weren't just recipe cards, but pages of handwritten notes about costs, suppliers, profit margins. Abuela had been running calculations alongside every dish, treating the kitchen like a laboratory of business intelligence. My fingers traced her elegant script as she detailed how changing one ingredient could save 30% on food costs, or how timing deliveries differently could maximize freshness and minimize waste. This wasn't just cooking, it was strategy. "What are you doing?" Eduardo's voice cut through the morning silence like a cleaver. I spun around, the recipe box clutched against my chest, my heart hammering so loud I was sure the whole house could hear it. His face twisted with rage as he saw what I held. "You little thief!" Abuela said I could learn. The slap came so fast I didn't see his hand move. My cheek exploded with pain, and I stumbled backward, the recipe box tumbling from my grip. Cards scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. "Girls cook, they don't run businesses," Eduardo roared, gathering the spilled recipes with violent urgency. "These aren't toys for curious little girls to play with." I watched in horror as he fed card after card into the kitchen fire. Abuela's lifetime of work, her carefully calculated formulas for success, curled into ash and smoke. "Papa, please." Another slap, harder this time. "You want to be a businesswoman. You want to steal from your own family. Then you can learn your place the hard way." He grabbed my wrist and dragged me to the kitchen counter. "Every day after school, you stand here. You cook. You clean. You learn what girls are supposed to do. No more sneaking around, no more stealing secrets that don't belong to you." As Eduardo stormed out, I knelt on the floor gathering the few recipe cards that had escaped the flames. My cheek throbbed, but the real pain came from watching years of Abuela's wisdom disappear into smoke. That night, Abuela Rosa found me crying in my bedroom. She sat on the edge of my bed, her weathered hands gentle on my burning cheek. "He burned them all," I whispered. Abuela smiled, tapping her temple with one gnarled finger. "The fire cannot touch what lives in here, Mija. I taught you more than recipes. I taught you to see numbers, to understand systems. That knowledge doesn't burn." She reached under my mattress and pulled out a second notebook, smaller than the first. "This one stays hidden. This one is just for you." As I opened the secret notebook and saw pages of business plans, supply chain diagrams, and expansion strategies written in Abuela's careful hand, I understood that she'd been preparing me for something Eduardo could never imagine. The kitchen had become my prison, but Abuela Rosa had just handed me the key to a different kind of power. 7 years later, the secret notebook had become my Bible. Every afternoon while locked in the kitchen, I memorized Abuela's business strategies disguised as recipe modifications. By 15, I could calculate food costs faster than Carlos could balance a checkbook, but I kept that knowledge hidden like contraband. My quinceañera was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became an execution. At 7 p.m. on October 15th, the ballroom at the San Antonio Country Club glittered with white roses and gold ribbons. 300 guests filled the room, the cream of San Antonio's Mexican-American business community. I stood in my traditional pink gown, feeling like a lamb dressed for slaughter. Eduardo had been unusually pleasant all week, which should have been my first warning. He'd even complimented my ability to organize the catering details for my own party. I thought maybe. Finally, he was beginning to see my potential. I was wrong. Halfway through dinner, Eduardo clinked his champagne glass and stood. The room fell silent as conversations died and forks stopped clinking against plates. "Tonight, we celebrate not just my daughter's 15th birthday," he announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom, but also a new chapter for the Gonzalez family business. My stomach dropped. This wasn't part of the planned evening. Eduardo gestured toward a table near the front where the Morales family sat. Roberto Morales owned the largest food distribution company in South Texas, a man whose contracts could make or break restaurant empires. "I'm pleased to announce the engagement of my daughter Maria to Roberto's son, Miguel." The words hit me like physical blows. Engagement, marriage, business partnership. Miguel Morales stood up, 23 years old with dead eyes, and a reputation for using his father's money to buy silence from the women he hurt. The room erupted in applause while I stood frozen in my pink dress, feeling the walls close in around me. "This union will secure our family's future," Eduardo continued, beaming at the crowd. "Miguel will bring his family's distribution network, and Maria will bring her domestic skills to strengthen both our enterprises. Domestic skills, not business acumen, not the strategic mind I'd been developing in secret for 7 years. Just my ability to cook and clean and produce children for a man I'd never chosen." I looked desperately around the room. Carlos and Diego were applauding enthusiastically. Abuela Rosa sat at the family table, her face a mask of forced composure, but I caught the slight shake of her head. She'd known this was coming. Miguel approached me with a smug smile, a ring box in his manicured hands. "Don't worry, Prinsa," he whispered as he slipped the diamond onto my finger. "I'll teach you how to be a proper wife." Something inside me snapped. "No." The word came out louder than I intended. The applause died like someone had cut the microphone. "No," I repeated, pulling the ring off my finger and dropping it onto the floor. "I won't marry him. I won't be sold like a side of beef to secure your business deals." Eduardo's face turned purple with rage. "Maria, sit down and stop embarrassing yourself." "Embarrassing myself?" I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. You're the one who just announced my engagement to a man I've never even had a conversation with. I turned to face the crowd of 300 guests, all watching our family drama unfold like a telenovela. You want to know what's embarrassing? A grown man who can't run his restaurants profitably, so he sells his daughter to save them. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the whispers started, spreading through the room like wildfire. The Gonzalez girl is loca, too wild for marriage. No respect for family. Eduardo grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh through the pink satin. You will apologize to the Morales family right now, or... I yanked my arm free and ran. I made it to the parking lot before Carlos and Diego caught me. They dragged me back into the ballroom, kicking and screaming, my carefully styled hair falling around my face, my quinceañera dress torn at the shoulder. Eduardo's voice boomed over the crowd as his sons forced me into a chair. My apologies for my daughter's hysteria. The excitement has overwhelmed her. But the damage was done. Roberto Morales was already gathering his family to leave, his face dark with embarrassment. Miguel looked at me like I was a rabid animal that needed to be put down. Over the next week, 3 major suppliers canceled their contracts with Gonzalez restaurants. The gossip spread through San Antonio's business community like poison. Eduardo Gonzalez couldn't even control his own daughter. How could he be trusted to manage business partnerships? That night, lying in my bed with bruises on my arms from where my brothers had grabbed me, I made a decision that would change everything. Abuela's notebook was hidden under my mattress, filled with business strategies that could save our family empire. But I wouldn't use them to help Eduardo anymore. I would use them to escape. The military recruitment office opened at 8 a.m. sharp. I would be there when the doors unlocked. The military recruitment office was exactly where I expected salvation to be at 8:05 a.m. that Monday morning. Staff Sergeant Martinez looked up from his coffee as I walked in, my quinceañera dress replaced by jeans and a determination that felt like armor. I want to enlist, I said without preamble. How old are you, miss? 15, but I'll be 18 in 3 years. I want to know my options. He studied my face, probably seeing the fading bruises on my arms. Army, Marines, what interests you? Logistics, I said immediately. Supply chain management. I want to learn how to move resources efficiently, coordinate complex operations. It took 3 years of weekend jobs, hidden savings, and maintaining perfect grades while enduring Eduardo's increasing hostility. When my West Point acceptance letter arrived on March 12th at 3:30 p.m., I carried it to the family dinner table like a loaded weapon. I've been accepted to the United States Military Academy, I announced, placing the letter next to Eduardo's plate. The silence that followed felt heavier than the quinceañera disaster. Carlos and Diego exchanged glances. Eduardo's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. No, he said simply. It's not your choice anymore. I'm 18 in 2 weeks. Eduardo's face went through several colors before settling on a shade of rage I'd never seen before. He stood up slowly, the letter crumpling in his fist. My daughter died today, he announced to the room. She has been replaced by a military whore who spits on her family's honor. Eduardo, my mother whispered, but he silenced her with a look. Get out of my house. I'd expected anger. I'd expected threats. I hadn't expected him to mean it literally. The next morning, I found my belongings in trash bags on the front lawn. The locks had been changed. When I tried to use my key, Carlos opened the door wearing a black suit. The funeral is at 2 p.m., he said without emotion. You're not invited. I drove to the church anyway and sat in my car across the street, watching our extended family file into Sacred Heart Catholic Church. They were all dressed in black. At the front of the procession, Eduardo carried a framed photo of me from my quinceañera, draped in black ribbon. They were holding an actual funeral for me. While I sat breathing in my Honda Civic, my family was inside mourning my death. Through the open church doors, I could hear Father Rodriguez delivering a eulogy for a daughter who had lost her way and chosen worldly ambition over family love. He spoke about the tragedy of children who abandon their heritage for the false promises of military glory. Diego emerged after the service and walked directly to my car. He leaned down to the driver's window with the same expression he'd worn when we were children, and he discovered me with a broken vase. "He means it, Maria. You're dead to us now. Don't come to the restaurant. Don't call. Don't contact any of us ever again. What about Abuela? She signed the death certificate too. That night I slept in my car in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, using my savings to buy coffee and pie until the sun came up. Every few hours I checked my phone for messages that never came. But someone had been watching. At 6 a.m., as I counted my remaining money, an envelope appeared under my windshield wiper. Inside was a cashier's check for $15,000 and a note in Abuela's handwriting. "For your uniform and books. Make me proud, Mija. Some battles are worth fighting alone." The money was enough to cover my remaining West Point expenses, but it came with a second note, written in her shaking hand. "They made me choose between you and the family business. I chose the business to survive, but my heart chose you. Forgive an old woman's cowardice." As I drove toward New York and my new life, I passed the Gonzalez restaurant on Commerce Street. A new sign hung in the window, family-owned and operated for 3 generations. Below it, someone had crossed out the number 3 and written 2. They had erased me from their history as efficiently as they'd erased me from their lives. But Abuela's money in my account and her secret notebook in my backpack meant I carried something they could never take away. I carried their own weapons into enemy territory, ready to use everything they'd taught me against the very system that had created me. The irony would only become clear years later when their empire crumbled, and they needed the daughter they'd buried to save them. West Point had been my sanctuary for 4 years, but Afghanistan at 4:30 a.m. felt like stepping into hell with a clipboard. Lieutenant Maria Gonzalez reported to Forward Operating Base Shank in Lager Province, expecting to coordinate food supplies and equipment distribution. Instead, Major Hendricks handed me a manifest that made my stomach turn. "Welcome to Mortuary Affairs, Lieutenant. You'll be coordinating the movement of our fallen." The irony wasn't lost on me. I joined the military to feed life, to use Abuela's logistics wisdom to nourish and sustain. Instead, my first assignment was organizing death. The bodies came in at all hours. Sergeant Williams, 22, from a roadside bomb outside Kabul. Corporal Johnson, 19, sniper fire during a village patrol. Each casualty required meticulous documentation, careful preservation, and precise coordination to get them home to families who would never be whole again. I developed systems, inventory management for the dead, supply chain logistics for grief. Every detail had to be perfect because these weren't just bodies. They were sons and daughters returning to mothers who would count every thread on their uniforms, fathers who would examine every fold in the flag. My efficiency earned me a reputation. "Ice Queen Gonzalez," the other officers called me. They thought my calm in the face of death meant I didn't feel it. They were wrong. I felt everything, but I'd learned to compartmentalize emotions the same way I organized supplies. 3 months into deployment, I made the mistake of trying to cook. The mess hall had received a shipment of fresh vegetables, a rare luxury in our forward position. That evening at 6:15 p.m., I volunteered to help prepare dinner, thinking it might reconnect me to something that once brought joy. I started making sofrito, the base for countless dishes Abuela had taught me. The smell hit me like shrapnel. Suddenly, I was 8 years old again, standing in our kitchen while Abuela explained how cumin and garlic created the foundation for everything we cooked. I could hear her voice. Every recipe tells a story, Mija. Every meal feeds not just the body, but the soul. But here, surrounded by the organized chaos of military logistics, that smell meant something different. It meant home. It meant family. It meant everything I'd lost when Eduardo held his funeral ceremony. I dropped the wooden spoon and ran outside, vomiting into the Afghan dust until my stomach was empty. Captain Rodriguez found me 20 minutes later, still shaking behind the supply tent. "You okay, Gonzalez?" "I can't eat it," I whispered. "Every time I smell those spices, I see their faces, my family. But also," I gestured toward the mortuary tent, "I see the boys we send home. I keep thinking about their last meals, about mothers who will never cook for them again." Rodriguez sat beside me in the dirt. "The smell triggers something. Everything triggers something. I organize death all day, then try to cook life at night. It doesn't work anymore. Food used to mean love in my family. Now it just reminds me of everything I've lost." That night, I received an email from Carlos, the first contact in 2 years. "Hope you're proud of yourself," it read. "Business down 40% since you left. Customers don't trust a family that can't keep their own daughter in line. Diego says you're probably feeding terrorists now instead of decent people. Papa says you finally found your calling organizing death. He always knew you were poison." I stared at that email until my eyes burned. Even thousands of miles away, even while I served my country in a combat zone, they found ways to wound me. The cruelest part was how they'd twisted my service into confirmation of their narrative. They'd said I fed death instead of life, and now I literally was. The next morning, I requested a transfer to a different unit. Major Hendricks denied it. "You're too good at this job, Lieutenant. I've never seen anyone coordinate mortuary operations with your level of precision. These families need to know their loved ones are treated with dignity. You give them that, but I'm not feeding anyone. I'm just organizing their grief." "Sometimes," he said, studying the latest casualty reports, "organizing grief is the most important meal you can serve." I spent 18 months in mortuary affairs, perfecting systems that ensured no fallen soldier was ever lost, delayed, or mishandled. My processes became standard operating procedure across multiple bases. But every night, I lay in my bunk knowing that back home, my family was probably celebrating my assignment as proof of their predictions. The transfer finally came through on a Tuesday at 11 a.m., along with orders that would change everything. "Report to Humanitarian Operations Command. Your logistics expertise is requested for refugee assistance coordination." As I packed my gear, I found Abuela's notebook buried at the bottom of my footlocker. I hadn't looked at it since arriving in Afghanistan, but now her words seemed prophetic. "Feed people's bodies, and you feed their souls. But sometimes, you must organize death to understand how precious life truly is." I was about to learn that feeding 2 million refugees would require every lesson death had taught me about the logistics of survival. The Ukrainian border at 5:45 a.m. looked like organized chaos, but I saw something different. Where others saw an impossible humanitarian crisis, I saw the largest logistics operation of my career. 2 million refugees needed 3 meals a day, and I had 6 weeks to make it happen. Colonel Martinez briefed me in a makeshift command tent surrounded by mud and desperation. "Lieutenant Colonel Gonzalez, you'll coordinate food distribution across 17 camps. We're partnering with the UN, NATO allies, and private contractors. No one's ever attempted anything this scale." I studied the maps, mentally calculating supply routes, delivery schedules, and storage requirements. The numbers were staggering, but they sang to me the same way abuela's recipes once had. Every refugee camp was a restaurant. Every meal was a promise kept. I'll need direct access to transportation assets and authorization to bypass standard procurement procedures, I said, already sketching supply chains in my notebook. And I want final approval on all menu decisions. Menu decisions? Sir, we're not just moving calories. We're feeding people who have lost everything. The difference between survival rations and actual meals is the difference between existing and living. Within 2 weeks, I'd revolutionized refugee food distribution across Eastern Europe. Using abuela's scaling principles, I transformed simple recipes into mass production formulas that could feed thousands while still tasting like home. Ukrainian families received borscht that reminded them of their grandmothers. Polish refugees found pierogi that carried the comfort of familiar traditions. The international media noticed. Angel of logistics, they called me. CNN ran a feature story. The Department of Defense fast-tracked my Medal of Honor nomination for unprecedented humanitarian achievement in crisis logistics coordination. But every success felt hollow. At 11:30 p.m. on my 6th week, I sat in my tent reading congratulatory emails from Pentagon officials, UN coordinators, and foreign ministers. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from an encrypted military account I didn't recognize. Saw your CNN interview. Mama always said you'd feed death, but you're feeding life now. Maybe we were wrong about some things. See, Carlos. After 4 years of silence, my brother had found a way to contact me. I stared at that message until my eyes blurred. Maybe we were wrong about some things, not an apology, not acknowledgement of the damage they'd caused, just a casual admission that their cruelty might have been slightly misdirected. The next morning brought a letter forwarded through military postal services. My mother's handwriting on expensive stationery. We saw you on television feeding those people. The whole neighborhood is talking about our daughter, the war hero. Eduardo won't admit it, but he watches every news story about you. He keeps the newspaper clipping in his desk drawer. I crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash, then retrieved it 5 minutes later. Success without family felt like winning a battle in an empty theater. Every refugee who thanked me in broken English reminded me of customers who once praised Gonzalez family cooking. Every media interview about my humanitarian achievements echoed with Eduardo's voice, saying I chose feeding death over life. The Department of Defense ceremony took place in Washington at 2 p.m. on a crisp October afternoon. Secretary of Defense Williams pinned the medal to my chest, while cameras flashed and officials applauded. My acceptance speech was broadcast live to millions, but the auditorium seats where families usually sat remained empty. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I video called the refugee camp commanders for our daily coordination meeting. As we discussed meal distributions for the following day, I found myself thinking about the irony that had become my life. I'd learned to feed millions using lessons from a grandmother who'd been silenced for teaching business to a girl. I'd turned mortuary affairs into humanitarian logistics, transforming death into life-sustaining systems. I'd achieved everything Eduardo claimed I never could, and done it by leaving his world behind. But victory without witness feels like screaming into silence. My phone rang at 11:15 p.m. Carlos again, this time a voice call. Maria, I almost hung up. Instead, I answered. What do you want? The restaurants are failing. Papa won't ask, but we need help. The confession hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. The restaurants are failing. Papa won't ask, but we need help. Carlos's words hung in the air of my hotel room like smoke from a grenade. After 6 years of silence, my brother was calling me at 11:15 p.m. from a number I didn't recognize, his voice stripped of the arrogance I remembered. "How bad?" I asked, settling back against the hotel pillows. "Bad. We're 3 weeks from bankruptcy. The suppliers cut us off last month. The bank is threatening foreclosure on the flagship location." I could hear the desperation he was trying to hide. Carlos, who once told funeral guests that I was dead to the family, was now begging for help from a ghost. What happened to the distribution contracts, the Morales family partnerships? A long silence. Miguel Morales pulled out after the incident with Papa. What incident? Eduardo had a heart attack 2 weeks ago. Massive one. He's in ICU at Methodist Hospital and the medical bills are. Carlos's voice cracked. "Maria, we're drowning. Diego mortgaged his house trying to keep the restaurants open. I sold my car. We've laid off half our staff." I sat up straighter. Eduardo in intensive care changed everything. The man who'd held a funeral for me while I was still breathing was now fighting for his own life. "Is he conscious?" "Sometimes. He keeps asking for..." Carlos paused. "He keeps asking for recipes, specific ones. Abuela's mole recipe, the sofrito blend you used to make. The doctors think he's delirious, but I think he's trying to remember something." The irony cut deep. Eduardo was dying while craving the exact recipes he'd burned to punish an 8-year-old girl for wanting to understand the family business. "I can't just abandon my post here," I said. "I have 2 million people depending on me. I know what you've accomplished. We all do. The whole neighborhood talks about Lieutenant Colonel Maria Gonzalez, the angel of logistics." His voice turned bitter. "They ask us why we never talk about our war hero sister. We tell them you're too important now for family." The accusation stung because it contained truth. I had become too important, too successful, too far removed from the people who'd shaped me before they tried to destroy me. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Carlos?" "Just look at our books from a distance. Use your expertise to tell us where we went wrong. But..." He hesitated. "Don't come here. Don't show your face at the restaurants. It would embarrass Papa if people knew we needed help from the daughter he disowned." Even in desperation, they wanted my skills without acknowledging my existence. They needed the ghost they'd created to save the empire that had buried her. "Send me everything," I heard myself saying. "Financial records, supplier contracts, employee schedules, inventory reports. I'll review it all." "You will." "I'll look. That's all I'm promising." After Carlos hung up, I stared at my Medal of Honor sitting on the hotel nightstand. Tomorrow I would coordinate breakfast for 2 million refugees. Tonight, I would try to save the family business that had never wanted me to understand it in the first place. My laptop chimed with an encrypted email at 12:30 a.m. Financial documents, supplier contracts, and a note from Diego. "These numbers are worse than Carlos told you. We have maybe 10 days before complete collapse. If you can fix this remotely, you'll have saved 15 restaurants and 47 jobs. If not, the Gonzalez name disappears from San Antonio forever." I opened the first spreadsheet and immediately saw the problems. Overstaffing, inefficient supply chains, expired contracts with vendors who'd been overcharging for years. They'd been running the restaurants the same way Eduardo ran his family, through intimidation and tradition rather than intelligence and adaptation. But as I worked through their numbers, one question haunted me. Was I trying to save their business, or was I trying to save the dying man who'd once told me he'd rather have no daughter at all? By 3 a.m., I had a plan. Whether I had the courage to implement it was another question entirely. By 3 a.m., I had a plan. By 6 a.m., I had emergency leave approved and a flight to San Antonio. By 9 a.m., I was walking into Methodist Hospital wearing scrubs, and a fake ID badge that identified me as Maria Santos, nutrition consultant. The military had taught me that the best operations succeed through invisible precision. If my family wanted help without acknowledgement, I would give them exactly that. Eduardo looked smaller than I remembered, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed like a mechanical prayer. His weathered hands, the same ones that had slapped me for reaching toward a recipe book, now lay pale and still against white hospital sheets. "Mr. Gonzalez," I said softly, adjusting my voice to a higher pitch. "I'm Maria Santos from the dietary department. Your son's mentioned you've been asking about specific foods." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused from medication. "Mija," he whispered. My heart stopped. For a moment I thought he'd recognized me. Then his gaze drifted away and I realized he was calling for his daughter, the daughter he'd declared dead. "No, Mr. Gonzalez, I'm just here to help with your nutrition plan. Can you tell me what foods you're craving?" "The mole," he mumbled. "Rosa's mole recipe, my little girl. She knew how to make it perfect." But I burned the book. Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. I burned everything. I spent the next 4 hours beside his bed, listening to a dying man confess to ghosts. He spoke about his daughter who'd been too smart for her own good, too ambitious for a girl, too much like his own mother Rosa. He talked about the Quinceañera disaster, the military funeral, the years of silence. "I thought I was protecting the family," he whispered during one lucid moment. "I killed my own daughter to save my pride." At 2:30 p.m., Carlos arrived for visiting hours and found me reviewing Eduardo's medical chart. "How is he today?" Carlos asked the question to me, but he was looking at his father. "Stable, but weak. He's been talking about recipes, something about mole sauce." Carlos nodded sadly. "Our grandmother's recipe. Papa destroyed it years ago in a fit of anger. Now he can't remember how to make it, but he keeps asking for it. The doctors think it's just the medication making him confused." "Maybe I could help," I offered carefully. "I specialize in recreating traditional recipes for patients with specific dietary needs. If you could tell me about your family's restaurant business, I might be able to develop something similar." That afternoon, I began my double life. At the hospital, I was Maria Santos, the nutrition consultant helping a dying man remember the tastes of his childhood. At night, I was Lieutenant Colonel Gonzalez, secretly restructuring the financial operations of Gonzalez restaurants from my hotel room. I negotiated new supplier contracts using military connections, streamlined staff schedules with efficiency protocols. I developed in refugee camps and implemented inventory management systems that reduced waste by 40%. Every change was attributed to consulting recommendations from an unnamed business recovery specialist. The brothers never questioned the miraculous improvements. They were too desperate and too proud to look too closely at their salvation. Within a week, the restaurants were operating in the black for the first time in months. Suppliers were paid. Staff was rehired. The banks extended their loan deadlines. "It's like having a guardian angel," Diego told Carlos during one of my overheard conversations. "Someone who really understands our business." The irony was exquisite. The daughter they'd erased was now their invisible savior, coordinating their rescue with the same precision she used to feed refugees. I was giving them exactly what they'd always wanted: my expertise without my presence, my value without my identity. But the hardest part wasn't the financial recovery. It was sitting beside Eduardo's bed each afternoon, watching him fade while calling for a daughter he'd taught himself to hate. On Thursday at 4:15 p.m., during one of his clearer moments, Eduardo grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Maria Santos," he said, studying my face with eyes that seemed almost focused. You have kind eyes like my Rosa, like my daughter used to have before I broke her spirit. I squeezed his hand gently. Tell me about your daughter. She was brilliant, could calculate profit margins in her head faster than my accountants with their calculators. But I was afraid if I let her lead, people would think I was weak, a man who couldn't control his own family. He closed his eyes. She joined the army to escape me, became some kind of hero feeding people all over the world. I see her on the news sometimes. My little girl all grown up and saving lives. His grip tightened. I killed her, and she became more than I ever dreamed. At 6 p.m. that evening, the heart monitor began its final alarm. At 6 p.m. that evening, the heart monitor began its final alarm. I reached for the call button, but Eduardo's hand caught mine with dying strength. Mija, he whispered, his eyes suddenly clear and focused directly on my face. I know those eyes, I know that voice, my Maria. You came home. The machines screamed around us, but time seemed frozen. After 6 years of invisibility, my father finally saw me. Papa, I whispered, dropping the fake accent, letting my real voice fill the space between us. I'm sorry, he breathed, each word costing him everything. I burned your book, but you became the recipe I never deserved. You saved us. You saved them all, and I never told you I was proud. His hand went limp in mine just as Carlos and Diego burst through the door, responding to the code blue announcement echoing through the hospital corridors. They stopped dead when they saw me in scrubs, holding their father's hand, tears streaming down my face. Maria, Carlos's voice cracked with disbelief. What are you? How are you? Maria Santos, Diego said slowly, recognition dawning. Nutrition consultant. Holy shit, Maria, you've been here all week. The medical team flooded the room, pushing us aside as they worked desperately to restart Eduardo's heart. I pressed myself against the wall, watching doctors perform CPR on the man who'd held a funeral for me while I was still breathing. They worked for 23 minutes. At 6:47 p.m., Dr. Richardson called time of death. In the sudden silence that followed, Carlos turned to me with eyes full of rage and confusion. You were here. You were with him every day, and we didn't know. You said you needed help but didn't want me to show my face, so I didn't. You let us think some angel consultant was saving our business while you were playing dress-up as a nurse. I was saving your business. I negotiated every supplier contract. I restructured your entire operation. I coordinated Papa's medical care. I did exactly what you asked me to do. Diego's face went pale. The guardian angel everyone kept talking about was your dead sister, the one you buried 6 years ago. The truth hung in the air like smoke from the crematorium where they'd probably take Eduardo's body. My brothers stared at me as if I were actually a ghost, which in many ways I was. He recognized you, Carlos said quietly. At the end, he knew. I nodded, unable to speak past the grief lodged in my throat. What did he say? He said he was proud. The words came out broken. He said I became the recipe he never deserved. Carlos sank into the visitor's chair, his head in his hands. Jesus, Maria, all this time we thought you abandoned us, but you've been saving us. From the shadows, just like you wanted. Diego moved closer, studying my face as if seeing me for the first time. The business turnaround, the supplier negotiations, the inventory management, that was all you. Military logistics applied to restaurant operations. Same skill set, different battlefield. And Papa never knew. He knew at the end. He called me Mija and said he was sorry. The silence stretched between us, filled with 6 years of misunderstanding, cruelty, and pride that had nearly destroyed everything our family had built. The funeral, Carlos said finally. We have to plan the funeral. I know, I'll coordinate the catering, manage the logistics. No, Diego interrupted. I mean, Do you want to be listed as family, in the obituary, or do you want to stay invisible? The question hit me like shrapnel. After everything, they were still offering me the choice to remain their ghost. I want to read the eulogy, I said firmly. As his daughter, as Lieutenant Colonel Maria Gonzalez, as the woman who saved his business while he was dying. Carlos and Diego exchanged glances. The whole community will be there, Carlos warned. Everyone who heard about our military sister but never met her. They'll want to know where you've been, why we never talk about you. Then they'll find out. Outside, the San Antonio sun was setting over a city that thought Eduardo Gonzalez had only 2 children. Tomorrow, they would discover he'd had 3 all along, and that the ghost daughter they'd created had been their salvation. But first, we had to bury the man who'd taught us that some secrets are worth burning for, and others are worth dying to protect. The morning of Eduardo's funeral, I stood at my hotel mirror at 7 a.m., adjusting my army dress blue uniform. Every ribbon, every medal, every insignia placed with military precision. The Medal of Honor caught the morning light like a promise kept. Carlos had called 3 times since midnight, his voice increasingly desperate. "Maria, maybe you should reconsider. The whole community will be there, people who have heard rumors about our military sister but never met her. This could get complicated." "It's already complicated," I'd replied. "I'm done being your ghost." Sacred Heart Catholic Church was packed beyond capacity when I arrived at 10:30 a.m. 300 mourners filled every pew, representing 3 generations of San Antonio's Mexican-American business community. I recognized faces from my quinceañera disaster, older now, but still whispering behind their hands. I walked down the center aisle in full uniform, my boots echoing against the marble floor with each measured step. Conversations died like candle flames as heads turned to track my movement. By the time I reached the family section, the entire church had fallen silent. Carlos and Diego sat in the front row, both pale as altar cloth. They'd saved me a seat, but I could see the tension in their shoulders, the way they avoided eye contact with the congregation behind us. Father Rodriguez began the service with nervous energy, stumbling over Eduardo's name twice. But when it came time for the eulogy, his voice steadied as he introduced me. "Eduardo's daughter, Lieutenant Colonel Maria Gonzalez, would like to share some words." The murmur that rippled through the church sounded like distant thunder. I walked to the podium, placed my hands on either side, and looked out at 300 faces that had heard of me but never seen me. "My name is Lieutenant Colonel Maria Gonzalez," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary. "I am Eduardo Gonzalez's daughter, his 3rd child, the one who's been dead to this family for 6 years. Gasps echoed from several pews. Someone in the back said "Dios mío" loud enough for everyone to hear. 6 years ago, my father held a funeral for me in this very church. He declared me dead because I chose military service over family servitude. He burned my grandmother's recipe book because I dared to understand business as well as cooking. He told me I would feed death instead of life. The silence was absolute now. Even the infants had stopped crying. He was right about one thing. I did feed death. In Afghanistan, I coordinated mortuary affairs, ensuring fallen soldiers returned home with dignity. I learned to organize grief with the same precision I once used to organize his kitchens. I saw Carlos shift uncomfortably in his seat. But then I learned to feed life. In Ukraine, I coordinated food distribution for 2 million refugees. I used the lessons my grandmother Rosa taught me, lessons my father tried to burn, to keep families alive during the darkest period of their lives. Mrs. Morales, sitting in the 3rd row, leaned forward with obvious interest. "Last week, when this family's restaurant empire faced bankruptcy, they called me for help. but they asked me to stay invisible. They wanted my expertise without acknowledging my existence. So I became Maria Santos, a nutrition consultant. I spent my days caring for my dying father while my nights were spent saving his business. The murmur grew louder. Diego buried his face in his hands. Eduardo Gonzalez recognized me at the moment of his death. His final words were an apology and a confession that he'd killed his daughter, but she became more than he ever dreamed possible. I looked directly at the Morales family section. This community watched him hold a funeral for a living daughter. You saw him erase me from family photographs, remove my name from business documents, deny my existence at social functions. But you also saw me on CNN feeding refugees. You read about me in newspapers. You knew Eduardo Gonzalez had a daughter serving her country with distinction. The silence had weight now, pressing down on everyone present. I stand here today not seeking forgiveness, but demanding acknowledgement. I am Lieutenant Colonel Maria Gonzalez, Medal of Honor recipient, coordinator of the largest humanitarian food operation in Eastern European history. I saved my father's business while he was dying, and I saved his soul at the moment of his death. I stepped back from the podium. Eduardo Gonzalez had 3 children. Today, all 3 are saying goodbye. As I walked back to my seat, the whispers started immediately. But they weren't whispers of scandal. They were whispers of recognition, of pieces finally fitting together, of a community realizing they'd witnessed something extraordinary. After the service, as we prepared to leave for the cemetery, Roberto Morales approached me directly. "Lieutenant Colonel Gonzalez," he said formally, "I believe we have business to discuss. My distribution company would be honored to work with the Gonzalez restaurants under new management." Behind him, I could see other business leaders forming a line to introduce themselves to Eduardo's previously invisible daughter. The funeral had become a resurrection. The reading of Eduardo's will took place at 2 p.m. on Monday in the law offices of Martinez and Associates, downtown San Antonio's most prestigious legal firm. I arrived in business attire, trading my military uniform for a charcoal suit that commanded a different kind of respect. Carlos and Diego sat across from me at the mahogany conference table, their faces masks of barely controlled anxiety. Between us lay the financial future of everything Eduardo had built. Attorney Rebecca Martinez opened the leather portfolio with ceremonial gravity. Eduardo Gonzalez made several amendments to his will in the final weeks of his life. The most recent changes were dictated from his hospital bed and witnessed by medical staff. My brothers exchanged nervous glances. To my sons Carlos and Diego, Martinez read, "I leave my gratitude for their loyalty and my forgiveness for their limitations. They inherit equal shares of the restaurant equipment, vehicles, and existing inventory." Carlos leaned forward. "What about the restaurants themselves, the real estate, the business licenses?" Martinez continued reading. "The Gonzalez restaurant empire, including all locations, property deeds, business licenses, supplier contracts, and the family name trademark, I leave to my daughter Lieutenant Colonel Maria Gonzalez, who saved what I nearly destroyed." The silence that followed felt like the moment between lightning and thunder. "That's impossible," Diego said, his voice rising. "He disowned her. We all witnessed it. The funeral." "The funeral was theater," Martinez interrupted, pulling out a second document. "This is a letter Eduardo wrote to me 6 months ago, along with instructions to be opened only after his death." She handed me the envelope. My name was written in Eduardo's careful script, but underneath it, he'd added something that made my breath catch. "Rosa's true heir." With shaking hands, I opened the letter and began to read aloud. "My daughter Maria, if you are reading this, then you have already proven everything I was too proud to acknowledge while I lived. You became the leader I trained my sons to be but never could create. You turned my rejection into your strength, my cruelty into your compassion. Carlos slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. She abandoned the family. She chose the military over us. I continued reading. I burned Rosa's recipe book not because Maria was a thief, but because I saw in her 8-year-old eyes the intelligence that would eventually expose my own ignorance. I knew that if she understood our business, she would surpass us all. My pride could not bear to be outshone by a daughter. The words hit Carlos and Diego like physical blows. But Rosa was smarter than me. She prepared for my stupidity. Martinez reached into her briefcase and withdrew a metal safety deposit box. Your grandmother left specific instructions. This box was to be opened only when Maria inherited the business. The key turned with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, was Abuela's original recipe book. Not the one Eduardo had burned, but an identical copy she'd hidden for 30 years. There's more, Martinez said, lifting out a manila folder. Business plans, expansion strategies, franchise blueprints. Your grandmother designed a global restaurant empire decades ago. She was waiting for the right heir to implement her vision. I opened the business plan dated 1995. Page after page of detailed strategies for international expansion, supply chain management, and franchise operations. At the bottom of the final page, in Abuela's handwriting, for Maria, when she is ready to feed the world. Diego stared at the documents in disbelief. Abuela planned this, all of it. Your grandmother knew Eduardo would try to control his daughter instead of develop her potential, Martinez explained. She set up a legal framework to ensure Maria would eventually inherit not just the restaurants, but the tools to transform them into something greater. Carlos's face had gone ashen. So everything we've built for the last 20 years was built on stolen recipes and limited vision, I said quietly. Abuela's recipes, Eduardo's pride, and your assumption that I would never come back to claim what was always meant to be mine. I closed the business plan and looked at my brothers. But here's what Eduardo's letter doesn't say, and what Abuela couldn't have predicted. I don't want revenge, I want transformation. What does that mean? Diego asked. It means you have a choice. You can fight this will in court, spend years in legal battles that will destroy what's left of the family name and the business. Or you can accept that I inherited this empire not to punish you, but to fulfill a vision that's bigger than any of us. I opened Abuela's business plan to the final page. She dreamed of Gonzalez Global Relief, not just restaurants, but a worldwide network that feeds both paying customers and those who can't afford to pay. Military logistics applied to humanitarian goals. Profitable restaurants funding refugee assistance programs. Carlos and Diego stared at the blueprints for an empire they'd never imagined. You want to turn our restaurants into charity kitchens? Carlos asked. I want to turn them into something that would make both Eduardo and Rosa proud. A business that feeds life on a scale neither of them ever dreamed possible. At 4:30 p.m., we walked out of that law office as the official owners of a legacy that was about to become something entirely new. The question was no longer who would inherit Eduardo's empire, but whether his sons would help build their grandmother's dream. The brothers made their choice at 8:30 a.m. the following Tuesday, walking into the flagship Gonzalez restaurant on Commerce Street, where I sat reviewing Abuela's expansion blueprints over coffee and her reconstructed mole recipe. We're in, Carlos said simply, sliding into the booth across from me. But we do this right. No charity cases disguised as business. If we're building a global empire, it has to be profitable and sustainable. Diego nodded, placing a folder on the table. I've been researching franchise models all night. If we're going to honor Abuela's vision, we need to scale it properly. Over the next 18 months, Gonzalez Global Relief transformed from a dying restaurant chain into an international phenomenon. Using military logistics principles I'd perfected in refugee camps, we created a franchise model where every location served both paying customers and community members in need. The first international location opened in Kyiv at 11 a.m. on a snowy December morning, serving both Ukrainian families recovering from war and American soldiers stationed at nearby bases. The second opened in San Salvador, the third in Beirut. Each restaurant operated on the same principle: excellent food for those who could pay, free meals for those who couldn't, all coordinated through supply chains that rivaled military operations. Carlos proved to be a natural ambassador, traveling to new locations and building relationships with local communities. Diego's analytical mind transformed Abuela's handwritten business plans into sophisticated financial models that attracted investors worldwide. By our second anniversary, Gonzalez Global Relief operated 127 locations across 6 continents, employed over 3,000 people, and served approximately 50,000 free meals monthly alongside our regular restaurant service. The media attention was inevitable. Forbes featured us on their cover with the headline, "The Logistics Empress," how a Medal of Honor recipient built a billion-dollar empire on military precision and grandmother's recipes. But the moment that mattered most came on a quiet Sunday morning at 9:15 a.m. as I stood in the original San Antonio location watching families gather for our weekly community breakfast. I saw Abuela Rosa's vision finally realized. A place where food created connection rather than separation, where business success measured not just profit but lives sustained. My phone buzzed with a text from General Martinez, my old commanding officer. Saw the 60 Minutes interview. Rosa would be proud. Eduardo too, though he'd never admit it. I smiled, thinking about the man who'd burned a recipe book to control his daughter, only to discover that some recipes live in the heart and can never be destroyed. At my desk that evening, I opened a letter from a young refugee in Germany whose family ate regularly at our Frankfurt location. She'd written in careful English, "Dear Mrs. Maria, your mole tastes like my grandmother's cooking in Guatemala. When I eat it, I remember home. When I grow up, I want to feed people like you do." These letters arrived daily from around the world, each one proof that Abuela's dream had become reality. Food as love language, transcending borders and bringing comfort to those who needed it most. Carlos and Diego had become true partners, no longer the brothers who'd once supported my erasure, but business leaders who understood that our greatest strength lay in the values we'd inherited rather than the pride we'd abandoned. The little girl who'd once reached for a forbidden recipe book had grown into a woman who fed millions daily using the same principles Abuela had whispered in secret. That recipes are power, that feeding people feeds souls, and that the best businesses serve something greater than profit. Today, when I walk through any of our locations worldwide, I see Eduardo's ambition transformed by Rosa's wisdom and guided by lessons learned in the hardest places on Earth. Military precision applied to humanitarian goals. Business success measured in lives sustained rather than just dollars earned. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family or underestimated because of your gender, age, or dreams that seemed too big for others to understand, I hope you'll remember this. Sometimes the recipes they try to burn are the exact ones the world is hungry for. Thank you for joining me on this journey from the kitchen to the battlefield to boardrooms around the globe. If these stories speak to you, I'd be honored if you'd like this video and consider subscribing for more tales of resilience, transformation, and the courage to feed both body and soul. Until next time, may you find the strength to turn your scars into recipes that nourish others. Stay strong, stay hungry for justice, and remember, you are never too broken to build something beautiful.